The Oberon pulled away from the planet's surface, engines thrumming with power as they ascended, but Captain Marek knew they were far from safe. The creature's tendrils still clung to the ship, fused to the hull in thin, fleshy strands that pulsed like veins, trailing from the dying city below and vibrating in rhythm with the signal. The crew could feel its presence seeping into the ship, infecting it with a creeping, inescapable dread. Inside the Oberon, a sense of panic settled over the crew as they took stock of their situation. Silva and Dr. Hesse hurried through the main corridors, sealing doors and checking for any breaches, while Leon struggled to isolate the sections of the ship affected by the creature's hold. Arden Cho manned the navigation console, hands trembling as she tried to calculate a course away from the planet. But the thrusters shuddered and stuttered, and each attempt to break free only seemed to anger whatever was now attached to them. "It's got us in its grip," Leon said, his voice ragged as he worked to bypass the creature's hold on their power systems. "It's draining our energy reserves, using the ship's power to spread itself." Captain Marek clenched his fists, his mind racing through every protocol he knew for containment, for invasion, for escape. But nothing in his training had prepared him for an enemy like this. Something alive, but not in any way he understood. "We have to sever it from the ship," he said, his tone hard, more a command to himself than anyone else. "We're not getting out of here unless we can cut it loose." Silva was already pulling up a diagnostic on the affected areas of the hull, eyes darting over the display. "Captain, it's not just on the outside. The tendrils have burrowed into the bulkheads. If it keeps spreading, it'll reach the engines, then life support. It's like a virus, spreading from cell to cell." Dr. Hesse swallowed hard, her gaze shifting to the floor where faint ripples seemed to move beneath the metal plating. "It's not just outside, it's in the ship. The bulkheads, the circuits, the vents. It's trying to make the Oberon a part of itself, just like it did to that city." Before Captain Marek could respond, a faint, wet sound echoed from somewhere deep within the ship, a squelching, slithering noise that sent chills through every crew member. It was moving inside, spreading like a living infection, seeking them out one by one. "Seal off the lower decks," Marek ordered, voice tight. "We'll isolate it, keep it from reaching the bridge and the engines." Leon and Silva moved quickly, locking down compartments and rerouting power to isolate the creature's influence. But as they worked, the walls around them began to shift subtly, as though flexing beneath an invisible weight. The metal itself groaned, bending under the pressure of something that was no longer simply attached to the ship, but part of it, threading itself through the structure, cell by cell. In the dim light, they could see something pulsing under the metal, a faint, sickly glow, like blood flowing through veins. Each pulse seemed to draw closer, as if sensing their movements, attracted by the rapid beat of their terrified hearts. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the entire ship shook violently. Arden gasped as her console shorted, sparks flying. She looked to Marek, her eyes wide with panic. "Captain, it's disrupting our systems. We can't control it. It's tearing through our power grid." Marek gritted his teeth, hands gripping the back of Arden's chair. "Then we'll fight it from within. No one gets left behind. We find a way to sever this thing, or we die trying." A loud metallic screech sounded from the hallway outside the bridge, and they all turned to see the walls bulging, distorting as the creature's tendrils slithered through the ventilation grates, merging with the structure, searching for entry points. The faint shapes of mouths and eyes appeared along the tendrils, distorted and grotesque, as if mocking the faces they'd seen on the planet below. Silva, her face pale but determined, drew her weapon and aimed at the tendrils. "Whatever you are, we're not going down without a fight." She fired, the bullet slicing through the tendrils, but the severed pieces only writhed and coiled, rejoining with the main mass, undeterred. Dr. Hesse watched in horror as the wounds knitted back together, the creature absorbing the metal and circuitry as if it were feeding on the ship's very essence. "It's adapting," she whispered, eyes wide. "It's learning our defenses, testing them. We can't fight it conventionally. It's something beyond, something we can't kill with bullets." Arden, clutching her wrist communicator, turned to Marek with a desperate suggestion. "What if we overload the energy cells, force a power surge to sever the tendrils where they're weakest?" Leon shook his head, his face grim. "If we overload the cells, it'll take half the ship's systems offline. We'd be defenseless, floating in the dark, and it might not be enough to kill it." "But it's worth a try," Captain Marek said, his voice resolute. "It's the only chance we've got. If we can sever it from the power source, even for a moment, it might weaken." They split up, each crew member taking their station, racing against the tendrils that slithered through the walls, the vents moving closer with each pulse. Marek and Silva set up explosives on the lower decks, rigging the power cells to release a controlled surge, while Leon and Arden worked to reroute what little power they could to the engines for a last-ditch escape attempt. As Dr. Hesse moved through the corridors, she heard a faint whisper, a voice distorted and agonized, emanating from the tendrils themselves. The voices of the city, of those trapped within, now part of this creature's terrible essence, whispered through the walls. "Help us. Stay with us. It hurts. Don't leave us." She recoiled, a hand over her mouth as the voices grew louder, mingling with the pulsing sound of the creature's heartbeat. It wasn't just a creature, it was the amalgamation of an entire civilization, twisted and consumed, bound to an eternal hunger that could never be satisfied. Suddenly, one of the tendrils darted from the vent, wrapping around her ankle with impossible strength. She screamed, clawing at the walls as it began to pull her down, her skin crawling as the tendril burrowed into her suit, slithering toward her leg. It burned like acid, a living infection spreading beneath her flesh. Leon heard her scream and rushed back, his face set with grim determination. He slashed at the tendril with his knife, severing it and pulling Dr. Hesse to her feet. But the damage was done. A dark stain spread beneath her skin, twisting and pulsing as the creature's essence seeped into her veins. Captain Marek's voice crackled over the comms. "We're losing time. Get to the bridge, now!" They regrouped, dragging Dr. Hesse, her face pale, veins darkening beneath her skin. She looked at Marek, eyes wide with horror. It's inside me. It's in my blood." Marek's gaze hardened, his jaw set. "Stay strong, Doctor. We're not losing you." The tendrils began to close in, filling the corridors with the wet, slithering sound of living flesh merging with metal. The crew fired what few rounds they had left, each shot barely slowing the creature's advance. Marek activated the explosive charge, a surge of power crackling through the ship, sending arcs of energy racing along the tendrils. The creature writhed, its tendrils severing in violent bursts of dark, viscous liquid that splattered against the walls. For a brief, glorious moment, the Oberon was free, the tendrils retracting, the creature's grip loosening. "Engage the engines, full power!" Marek shouted, his voice fierce, a flash of desperate hope in his eyes. Arden jammed the thrusters forward, the engines roaring as they lurched upward, pulling away from the planet. For a heartbeat, they felt the ship break free, moving through the cold, open void. But the reprieve was short-lived. The creature's severed tendrils writhed on the floor, merging and reforming, coiling back into place, each piece of it regenerating, stronger and more insidious. The crew watched in horror as it began to spread once more, faster, reaching toward them with a hungry, unstoppable purpose. "It's evolving," Silva murmured, eyes wide. "Each time we hurt it, it learns, adapts." The Oberon's hull groaned, and the walls of the bridge buckled as the creature pressed against the ship, its tendrils encasing them once again, pulling them back toward the planet, toward the dead city. The voices returned, louder and clearer, a chorus of agony and despair that filled the bridge, making it feel like they were drowning in the memories of the dead. Captain Marek looked at his crew, his expression a mix of defiance and resignation. "If it's going to take us, we make sure it never leaves this planet." Silva looked at him, realization dawning. "Captain, you mean—" "Yes." Marek's eyes were fierce. "We take it down with us. Prepare the core for a detonation. If this thing wants us, it's going to burn with us." They moved quickly, knowing this was their last chance. Leon began the override for the core, his hands trembling but his resolve unwavering. Dr. Hesse, weakened but determined, helped him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and grim acceptance. As the creature's tendrils broke through the walls, filling the bridge with its twisted, fleshy forms, Captain Marek activated the core's countdown, his voice a fierce, unwavering command. "We're not your prey. We're your executioners." The creature lunged, but the core's power surged, filling the Oberon with a blinding light as the countdown neared zero. In those final moments, Marek and his crew stood together, defiant, facing the creature with the knowledge that they would stop it from spreading its curse to another world. And in one final, explosive burst of light, the Oberon and the creature became one with the stars, leaving nothing behind but silence and a warning forever lost in the void. The Oberon was falling, its trajectory no longer its own. The massive creature's tendrils twisted around the ship like roots, reclaiming a tree felled centuries ago, drawing it back toward the planet, toward the ancient city where the nightmare had begun. Metal groaned under the relentless pull, and the ship shuddered with each sickening drag downward. The crew braced themselves, holding onto consoles and each other as the ship tilted, every system flickering as the alien infection seeped into its core. Captain Marek steadied himself, his gaze sweeping over his crew, Silva, Leon, Arden, and Dr. Hesse, each battered, faces drawn but fierce. They all knew there was no escape. The plan to jettison the creature and escape had failed, but something resolute flickered in their eyes. If they were going down, they'd go down on their own terms. Marek took a breath, his voice steady. "We're detonating the core. We take this thing out, permanently." Leon looked up, his face a mask of determination. "Core is primed, Captain. Once I hit the override, there'll be no going back." We'll have maybe a minute before the core blows." Dr. Hesse, leaning against the wall, her veins darkening as the infection spread through her body, nodded. "It's us or the galaxy. We die here, or we let this thing reach others." Her voice shook but held firm resolve. "I'd rather face death." A low growl echoed through the ship, reverberating down the corridors like the rumbling of a hungry beast. The creature seemed to sense their intention, and the walls pulsed in response, undulating with tendrils that slithered closer, closing in with a relentless hunger. The crew watched as mouths opened across the flesh-like structures, twisted expressions frozen in agony, echoing the tortured faces they'd seen on the planet. Silva drew her weapon, backing toward Leon and Arden. "It knows," she murmured, voice edged with terror. "It's coming for us." Marek placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip steady. "Let it come. We face it here, together." As Leon initiated the core override, a countdown blinked onto every screen in the bridge. 60 seconds. The core began to pulse with energy, and a deep hum filled the Oberon, drowning out even the creature's anguished cries. The ship shuddered and the lights dimmed as power redirected toward the core, the final act of defiance setting the ship ablaze from the inside. With the countdown ticking, the creature surged through the corridors in a final desperate attack, its tendrils merging into a massive singular form that filled the bridge doorway, blocking their only exit. It loomed before them, its sinewy body shifting, faces emerging and disappearing along its slick surface, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes hollow and dark. The creature bore down on them, a monstrous amalgamation of every soul it had ever claimed, all bound by a singular, insatiable hunger. Captain Marek faced it, his jaw set, eyes burning with a quiet fury. "You've taken everything from them," he said, voice low and steady. "But you won't take us. Not like this." The creature let out a deep, guttural noise that rattled the walls, its many mouths contorting as it shifted forward. Tendrils snapped out, whipping through the air toward Marek, Leon, and Dr. Hesse, who stood closest to the doorway. The captain fired his weapon, and the shots tore into the creature's body, but it only slowed the tendrils for a moment, each wound closing almost instantly, leaving no sign of damage. Dr. Hesse, her face pale and glistening with sweat, stepped forward, raising her weapon. "It's taken enough of us," she whispered, her voice a fierce whisper of defiance. She fired, her shots aimed straight for one of the creature's massive eyes, and as her bullets struck, the creature recoiled, letting out a shriek that seemed to echo from every wall. But the creature retaliated, tendrils lashing out and piercing Dr. Hesse's arm, pulling her toward the wall. She gasped, struggling as the tendrils wrapped around her, the infection spreading visibly across her skin, dark veins branching out in twisted patterns. Marek lunged, grabbing her by the shoulders, trying to pull her free, but the creature held tight, pulling her deeper into its mass. "Let me go," she cried, her eyes meeting Marek's, filled with a desperate determination. "Don't waste the time. You have to make sure it ends." Tears stung Marek's eyes, but he nodded, releasing her. Dr. Hesse took one last, shuddering breath, her gaze softening. "End it, Captain." She raised her weapon one final time, firing into the creature's face, her scream merging with the creature's howl as it consumed her, her figure dissolving into the writhing mass. 30 seconds. Silva and Leon stared, faces stricken, but Marek's voice cut through the horror. "We go down fighting. This thing doesn't leave." Arden clutched her console, her hands trembling, her gaze locked on the countdown. "Captain, if there's anything you need to say, now's the time." Marek nodded, his face hard but his voice filled with a strange gentleness. "It's been an honor, all of you. We're ending this, and we'll make sure no one else follows." Silva and Leon joined them, forming a final line as the creature surged forward, its mass swelling to fill the bridge, tendrils whipping wildly, mouths opening and closing, each face a twisted echo of despair and rage. The creature was relentless, each strike aimed to ensnare, to absorb, to consume. But the crew fought back, their final act one of defiance, each blow a promise to take the creature down with them. 10 seconds. The countdown blared across the screens, and the core's hum grew to a crescendo, filling every corner of the ship. The creature let out a final, agonized roar as it felt the energy surge through the Oberon, its mass shuddering, its tendrils faltering, as if sensing the imminent destruction. Captain Marek took one last look at his crew, his heart filled with both sorrow and fierce pride. In these final moments, they had reclaimed something the creature could never understand: courage, resolve, and the defiance of beings who refused to be taken without a fight. The creature lunged in a desperate attack, its entire form converging upon them as the core's final pulse ignited, bathing the bridge in blinding, searing light. In that final instant, the creature and the crew met, united by a singular, unbreakable force, a determination to end this nightmare once and for all. The core detonated, releasing a wave of energy that tore through the Oberon, obliterating everything in a storm of light and heat. The creature let out one last unearthly scream, a wail of rage and despair that echoed through the void before vanishing into silence, its twisted form shattered into oblivion. In the darkness that followed, only a faint, lingering whisper remained, a warning, a testament, lost to the cold emptiness of space. And in that silence, the planet below fell still, its curse lifted, its dead city finally free from the endless hunger that had haunted it for so long. The Oberon Tsiun was gone, its sacrifice a final act of mercy and defiance, a beacon of light swallowed by the darkness, but leaving behind a legacy, a memory of those who had fought and died so that no others would suffer the same fate. And somewhere in the vast, cold expanse of space, that warning drifted, a ghostly whisper waiting for someone else to find it, echoing one last, chilling message to any who might listen: stay away, or be consumed.